dating 1Clement, the Christian letter, a lot of people put it around 95. Now, they have other reasons, the broader ranges of other types of probabilities. I don't want to go into that, even though it could be true. I want to stick to something more centralized. Now, when they use this dating, sure, they generally would put it around 95. I get that. That's kind of a nice balance. But it does mention the Jerusalem still standing and all in the present tense. Now, it also mentions, I want to bring up other information, it mentions the death of Peter and Paul. Now, that's a type of persecution. I want to focus on persecution. Now, I made this earlier mistake in my earlier times. I recovered real quick. But I thought because it mentioned Peter and Paul's, I put the persecution more to them. Because people were talking about Domitian's persecution. Well, they usually talk about, they really don't really talk about that kind of persecution. When they talk about church persecution, they usually bring up Domitian. Sure, they'll talk about Nero, and then they'll talk about some other people. But when you really analyze it, most scholars, it comes to a more of a simple conclusion that there was persecution so much, it's hard to know what was a persecution. Does that make any sense? So my mistake was because it was to Peter and Paul, I brought it more closer to a Peter and Paul and not a Domitian, which was a mistake. You see what I'm saying? That would have been a mistake because there's so much persecution. It could have been in the 80s. You see what I'm saying? Or the 70s. And maybe it's just a thing of convenience because of certain things Nero going on and Domitian. So I made that. But when you bring up these categories as to why, and put that on like, was Jerusalem and the temple still there? What you had to do is you had to find sources that would say in a particular other ways. And now it sounds weird, but what I mean by this, sometimes they'll say something in the present tense, but it's not. It's more poetic. Does that make any sense? Like if I just rambled off on my video, hey guys, go to the temple, you can make sacrifices. Either I've been in a fucking cave and I still think it's up, or the other. And so what you'd have to do is you'd have to get as many copies of whoever might have talked about the temple and how they put it in a certain tense. I don't think there'd be many sources. And you couldn't go too far, like after 300 AD, because then obviously those who are saying it, at that time, the message would kind of have got around. And I know that's kind of blurry, the got around, because that could have been got around after 70 AD. How fast is it getting around? But you got to get to the conclusion of the getting around. Finally has to come to its conclusion where, okay, that guy is so late, he's making shit up because he must have been also like me under a cave, even though that could still probably be true. I know that's the world's worst argument, but you got to still give it its variable. And so that would be my question to Bart Ehrman. The comparative nature on that. Now, if I were to guess, I think it would highly favor that those who are talking about it, that would be more just talk about it literally than the other way around. And so I would suspect that I would give Clement the benefit of the doubt. Whereas all the other persecutions, they're so proliferated. Well, you can talk about the proliferation, maybe Nero, to this, to that as a barometer, but it's hard to get those barometers. But I think the barometer of persecution is so much static because we're judging more like a notion here that's we might not know because we don't have much information. But if you view it more like a static, the static part is much more worse because the persecution is more like, what do you mean the church was persecuted? They were always persecuted. Polycarp, Ignatius, Justin Martyr, just to name a few. You know what I mean? When is this persecution? But where this, it identifies it more as a particular, because persecution was common where the direction of those who would say it literal as to not. I think it'd be more common to say it more literally than not. And so from the argument of silence, we might be able to generate this more information. I don't know if you can do that because of so much ignorance, but I think you can get a notion if you base it off this kind of like static principle. So I think it leans more towards pre-destruction of the temple. What do you think about that, Bart?